12 ordinary foods you will deeply wish you had secured before the spring of 2026, not because they vanish overnight, but because the moment you truly need them, the old way of buying them is already gone. Right now, grocery costs across many regions have quietly climbed between 15 and 25% in just 1 year. Yet the percentage is not the real story. The real story is how it unfolds. Silently, almost invisibly, the shelves still look full. But every time you return, the variety shrinks a little, the price ticks upward a little, and you gradually settle for what remains instead of selecting what you actually want. More than 60% of our food supply depends on transport networks and unbroken cold chains. When those costs squeeze tighter, the system does not shatter. It constricts. And that constriction is where the hidden danger lives. The danger is not empty cupboards. The danger is having plenty of food that no longer functions the way it once did. Stay with me until the seventh item, because that marks the turning point most households completely fail to anticipate. You still see enough meals in front of you, yet you begin to dodge them, postpone them, and eventually start skipping them altogether. And once that pattern begins, every bit of preparation you made earlier starts losing its worth. Let us begin with number 12, canned tomatoes. You never imagine needing a backup supply of canned tomatoes. That assumption is precisely why they will be the first thing you miss. Try to recall the last time you cooked a proper meal without reaching for them. Much harder than you expect. Someone once insisted their pantry was fully stocked. Rice, meat, preserved goods, everything. But after just a handful of days, their meals developed a strange flaw. Not a shortage of volume, but a missing foundation. The food turned dry, fractured, lacking any binding element. And the absent piece was merely a few cans of tomatoes. You still possess food, but you can no longer assemble it the same way. Canned tomatoes are rarely the star of the plate. They are the unifier. Sauces, broths, braises, casseroles all demand something to weave every component into a single satisfying dish. Without them, whatever you prepare stays as scattered fragments. Nourishing perhaps, but not a cohesive meal. The trouble is not that tomatoes suddenly vanish from aisles in one dramatic sweep. The trouble is that the supply is quietly thinning at its origin. California, which dominates processed tomato output, has wrestled with drought strain and irrigation costs for many seasons. There is no single dramatic shock, merely a gradual shift that does not reverse course. Prices inch upward. Selection narrows, and you only catch on when familiar labels are absent. Canned tomatoes hold their quality for roughly 18 to 24 months and frequently endure longer if the can stays sound. No dents, no bulging, no chilling required, no special environment, just a cool, dry cupboard. That simplicity is all you need. A frequent error is purchasing only for immediate need. You visit the market, snatch one or two cans for the current week, and assume that rhythm is sufficient. But that habit also guarantees you always pay today's higher price instead of locking in yesterday's lower cost. You are not lacking funds. You are simply purchasing at the wrong moment. The answer is not frantic accumulation. Just keep a gentle rotation of 6 to 12 cans at home. Use one, replace one. You are not hoarding. You are maintaining your position. By May of 2026, you will still spot tomatoes on the shelf, but you will no longer grab them with the same casual ease. And you will remember a time when a simple can of tomatoes was something you tossed into a cart without ever thinking about the price. You will not regret skipping the luxury items. You will regret ignoring something so ordinary that you once considered it too cheap to value. Number 11. White vinegar. You do not purchase white vinegar when necessity strikes. You purchase it when the moment has already passed you by. Someone recounted that they still held plenty of food at home, yet after several days, they began consuming less. Not from a shortage of supplies, but because the food grew progressively harder to face each meal. You still possessed food, but you no longer wished to eat it. The core issue is not the absence of groceries, but the absence of a method to keep groceries genuinely edible. That is precisely when white vinegar steps forward, not as a flavor accent, but as a practical instrument. With merely 5 to 10 milliliters, You can rebalance taste, soften tough textures, and make day-old meals noticeably more palatable. For preservation, a light layer of vinegar can stretch the life of food by 24 to 48 hours under ordinary conditions. With vegetables, a quick soak helps retain freshness much longer. With simple items like quick pickles, you transform fresh produce into something usable for days, sometimes far longer. You do not consciously register losing food bit by bit. You only notice you are eating less each day, and this is the blind spot many people share. Vinegar does not spike in cost first. It always climbs later, silently. You overlook it because the price tag still seems trivial. But that very assumption is why you repeatedly buy it at a higher rate than before. You are not broke. You are simply repurchasing things that used to be cheaper. When you are forced to stretch older food, vinegar helps revive the taste. When you refuse to waste what you have, it grants you a little more borrowed time. And when your options narrow, it helps you convert leftovers into something you can still willingly consume. White vinegar carries virtually no expiration clock. You can store it for years with zero degradation in quality. Yet its genuine worth is not its own lifespan, but how it extends the lifespan of everything else: food, raw ingredients, and even your stretched budget. The gravest blunder is only acquiring it when a recipe demands it and always paying the going rate. The remedy is simpler than you imagine. Keep 1 or 2 unopened bottles at home. You are not piling up reserves. You are preserving your ability to act. Because a moment will arrive when you do not lack food, but you lack the means to keep that food from spoiling and being discarded. And at that exact moment, you will wish you had bought it back when it was still so cheap it barely registered as a decision. Number 10. Popcorn kernels. You will stroll straight past them without pausing because your mind labels them as mere snacks. And that instinct is exactly why you will underestimate their power. Someone once shared that during their toughest stretch, the item that helped them stay consistent was not meat, not costly rations, but dried corn. Not for its flavor, but because it was something they could depend on every single day. The problem is not that popcorn kernels will vanish from store shelves. The problem is that the entire grain category is under mounting strain from rising production expenses and erratic weather. What you gaze at today still seems endless, yet the reality behind the scenes has already begun shifting. You do not lose access all at once. You gradually lose choices until only the priciest options linger. Dry popcorn kernels can be preserved for 10 to 20 years if kept sealed and shielded from moisture. But their deeper value is not about time. It is about efficiency. With just about 30 grams of kernels, you can generate a portion delivering 100 to 150 calories. Add a little oil or butter, and that figure climbs further. And with a single oversized, low-cost bag, you can produce dozens of servings at a cost per meal lower than nearly anything else in the supermarket. This is not a novelty snack. This is one of the most affordable and robust energy stores you can purchase. Yet the classic error is choosing the pre-packaged microwave versions. Convenient, quick, but costly and short-lived. Meanwhile, plain dry kernels give you more servings, longer shelf stability, and far less dependence on the industrial system. You do not feel the squeeze immediately. You merely observe that the next time you visit, the price nudges higher. Then the next time, the variety narrows a little more, and by the time you genuinely require a low-cost energy staple, you realize the entire landscape has changed. When you no longer have abundant choices, you do not search for something delicious. You search for something sufficient. And this is the insight most people overlook. Popcorn kernels do not demand a sophisticated kitchen. Just a simple heat source, a small gas burner, an alcohol stove, or even a basic pot, and you can convert them into a swift, hot meal packing enough energy to keep you moving. Storage is remarkably straightforward. Place them in an airtight container. Block moisture. Keep them in a cool, dry location. A wise tactic is to buy 2 or 3 large bags while prices remain moderate. Then portion them out for gradual consumption. You are not panic buying. You are anchoring a stable energy source before it ceases to be stable. Because there will arrive a time when you are not hunting for something tasty. You are only hunting for something enough. And you will recall an era when a humble sack of popcorn kernels was something you ignored purely because you did not grasp its true role. Number 9. Canned fish. You imagine canned fish as simply a fallback option. In truth, it is something you will need before you even have time to prepare. You believe you can lean on fresh provisions, meat, fish, crisp vegetables. But with just a minor disruption, a brief power loss, sweltering weather, or simply food stored a touch too long, you start to waver. Not because you are out of supplies, but because you are no longer certain it is still safe to consume. And when that certainty evaporates, your options evaporate alongside it. Canned fish is not superior to fresh meat, but it is dramatically more stable. And in countless situations, stability outweighs taste. A small tin can deliver roughly 15 to 25 grams of protein, along with omega-3 fatty acids and essential minerals. Yet its authentic value is not captured in nutritional figures. Its value lies in possessing a food source you can peel open and use instantly. No power required, no second guessing, no nervous inspection. You are not paying for the fish. You are paying for absolute certainty. Regarding cost, this is an item that rises in a manner that lulls you into complacency. Not a sharp leap, but each time you return, the number creeps slightly higher. Before, you could toss a few cans into the basket without glancing at the price. Now you start to notice, but still tell yourself it is insignificant. And that is when you begin slipping behind. When meat prices surge, people pivot toward canned fish. When they pivot, the shelves do not empty instantly, but they gradually thin out. Fewer selections, fewer familiar brands, and you wind up buying whatever is left. The critical moment is not when you can no longer find it. It is when you start realizing you should have acted earlier. Canned fish can endure 3 to 5 years, sometimes beyond if stored correctly. That grants you an edge very few other foods can offer. You can buy ahead without fretting over spoilage. A straightforward method is to perpetually keep a reasonable quantity at home, not to hoard, but so you never face the pressure of buying after conditions have already shifted. Because eventually, you will not choose based on preference. You will choose based on safety, and you will realize what you once dismissed as unnecessary was precisely the thing you needed first. Number 8. Salt. You can trim many elements from a meal, but there is one substance that, if absent, causes everything to collapse surprisingly fast. That substance is salt. Not solely because you need it to make food taste acceptable, but because your body requires it to perform basic operations. And equally important, your food supply needs it to endure longer. Most households fail to account for this. They set aside enough rice, enough canned staples, enough protein, but they never think about how to prevent those reserves from slowly degrading. Salt does not cure the problem instantly. It prevents the problem from ever taking hold. With just a modest amount, you can dramatically slow the spoilage cycle. In some cases, meat, fish, vegetables, when handled properly with salt, can outlast their normal window considerably. No machinery needed, no electricity, just one brutally simple ingredient. The peril is not that you own zero salt. The peril is that you possess too little when the moment demands you use much more. When circumstances shift, you begin deploying salt in unfamiliar ways, not merely for seasoning, but to preserve, to process, to avoid having to throw away what you already possess. And that is when you finally recognize its genuine worth. Salt essentially does not degrade over time. If kept dry and sealed, you can store it for decades with no loss in function. It belongs to a rare class of items that time does not weaken. Time only tricks you into forgetting how critical it truly is. The dilemma is that you never ready yourself for things that are perpetually present. You only react when they start to become scarce. And by that stage, you do not lack salt. You lack the capacity to stop your food from vanishing piece by piece. Storing salt is beautifully simple. Block moisture, keep it sealed. Tuck it in a dry spot. No exotic conditions required. The solution is not to accumulate a mountain of it. Just guarantee you always have more than your current estimate of use, because at some pivot point you will no longer view salt as a seasoning. You will see it as a survival instrument, and you will understand why the most basic item in the kitchen is the very thing that stops everything else from disappearing prematurely. Number 7. Whole spices. You do not skip meals because you run out of food. You skip meals because the food ceases to be worth eating. That threshold arrives much sooner than anyone expects. There is a distinct phase when people still possess enough rice, enough preserved goods, enough caloric energy, yet they start consuming less. Not because they are rationing wisely, but because every meal flattens into the same monotonous, dry, uninspiring pattern, and the desire to eat slowly dies. The problem is not the quantity of provisions. It is that you no longer possess a method to transform those provisions into a genuine meal. That is the precise moment when whole spices become the most critical thing you previously ignored. Unlike ground spices, which shed their aromatic power after just a few months, whole spices can retain their full character for 3 to 4 years, sometimes longer if stored correctly. Peppercorns, cinnamon sticks, star anise, cloves, compact, featherlight, inexpensive, yet capable of entirely reinventing a dish with just a little freshly crushed pepper. Or by simmering a single cinnamon stick, you can lift a simple pot into something layered with aroma, with warmth, with a feeling of newness. And that is not a luxury. It is how you protect the ability to eat with consistency. The genuine value of spices is not housed in nutrition. It is housed in psychology. When you still want to eat, you can sustain your energy levels. When you start losing your appetite, you start skipping meals. And when you start skipping meals, all the preparation you did beforehand begins to hemorrhage its effectiveness. In terms of pricing, spices belong to a category directly exposed to import volatility. Most originate from India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. When shipping expenses and duties inflate, the shelf price follows. Not overnight, but inevitably. You do not detect it in a single receipt. You detect it after several months of quiet increases. The classic mistake is buying pre-ground spices for ease, but you are swapping short-term convenience for long-term erosion of value. You buy more, consume faster, and return to purchase again at a steeper price. The urgent moment is not when spices vanish. It is when you realize you no longer want to eat the food you have. Storage is extremely straightforward. Keep sealed, block light, block moisture. Nothing complicated required. A smart shift is to migrate toward whole spices and only grind what you need at that moment. You are not stockpiling spices. You are preserving the power to turn bare rations into something you can still face every day. Because at some stage, the trouble is not whether you have enough food. It is whether you still have the will to eat it. And if you surrender that will, you lose far more than you calculated. You think you have readied enough. But if starting today, you could only eat what sits inside your home, how long before you begin avoiding that meal, not because the cupboard is bare, but because you no longer desire to eat it? And that is a question very few people have prepared to answer honestly. A crisis does not ignite with hunger. It ignites when you no longer want to consume what you already hold. Number 6, sugar. You do not require sugar to survive biologically, but you will discover you need it sooner than your plans assume. There is a phenomenon that occurs which almost no one prepares for. It is not a food shortage, but your body begins to dip without warning. You still take in meals, still consume enough calories, but there are sudden gaps when you feel unexpectedly drained, sluggish, unable to concentrate, and you cannot pinpoint the cause. That is not a food deficit. That is a rapid energy deficit. Most of the staples you store, rice, dry goods, tinned meals, provide slow-burning energy, steady but insufficient to handle moments when your body demands a swift response. Fatigue, blood sugar dips, heightened stress, or simply a window where you cannot sit down for a full meal. That is when sugar transforms into something you cannot substitute. Just a small amount can alter your state within minutes. No cooking, no elaborate prep, no waiting. This stands among the few items on this list capable of delivering an immediate physical effect. But the value of sugar extends beyond mere energy. It keeps you moving when you have lost the will to eat. It keeps you alert when exhaustion begins to pull you under. And in many harsh stretches, it keeps you from mentally quitting. Beyond this, sugar serves as one of the most fundamental natural preservatives. Jams, syrups, preserved fruits, all lean on sugar to stretch their usable window. No equipment, no sophisticated system, only the correct ratio. Sugar will almost never spoil if kept dry and sealed. You can store it for years without any loss in function. This positions it as one of the most durable forms of stored energy imaginable. Yet this is the detail most people overlook. You never think to store extra sugar because you never picture the moments when your body no longer has the reserves to function normally. The critical moment is not when food runs out. It is when you feel yourself beginning to crash and have absolutely nothing to haul you back up swiftly. The solution is elegantly simple. Keep a modest quantity, enough to stretch across time. No need for excess. Just sufficient to prevent yourself from sliding into a state you cannot control. Because eventually the issue is not whether you have enough to eat. It is whether you have enough to keep pushing forward. And when you reach that invisible wall, you will grasp that what you once wrote off as unnecessary is precisely what stops you from collapsing the fastest. Number 5. Cooking oil. You may possess plenty of food, but without oil, you cannot alchemize it into a proper meal. It sounds like a minor detail, but try constructing a cooked dish without any oil. No frying, no sautéing, no fat to carry heat. Everything turns dry, scorches rapidly, and becomes far harder to consume than you realize. There is a subtle insight few people catch. Oil is not merely an ingredient. It is a dense energy carrier. Just a single tablespoon of oil can provide substantially more calories than the same weight of many other foods. That means you can inject energy quickly without increasing the volume you must eat. A massive advantage when portions are restricted or groceries grow expensive. Oil also aids heat retention during cooking, letting food cook uniformly, hold on to moisture, and more crucially, it helps you extract maximum value from simple ingredients. A few vegetables, a little starch, add oil, and it suddenly becomes a complete, satisfying unit. But here lies the part most people overlook. Cooking oil is deeply tied to global supply chains. Sunflower, soybean, olive. When conflict, climate shifts, or production snags occur, oil prices do not jump immediately. They escalate step by careful step. And you only truly register the shift when that familiar bottle costs noticeably more than it did a few months prior. Oil carries a shelf life of roughly 12 to 24 months, varying by type. If stored in a cool spot away from light and heat, you can preserve its quality longer. The urgent moment is not when oil disappears from the earth. It is when you find yourself cooking more frequently and suddenly realize its cost is climbing faster than your budget anticipated. The wise approach is to always keep 1 or 2 bottles as backup, not to amass a giant cache, but so you are never forced to purchase when the price has already spiked. Without oil, you do not lack ingredients. You lack the means to eat them properly. Because at some juncture, the trouble is not whether you own the components. It is whether you possess a way to transform them into a meal at all. Number 4. Flour. You think the goal is to have food. The deeper truth is you need the capacity to create food. There is an enormous gulf between owning ingredients and possessing the ability to manufacture something edible. Most people lean heavily on items that arrive ready-made. Instant rice, canned meals, convenience products. But when those ready-made options begin to shrink in availability or spike in cost, you will recognize you are missing a far more fundamental thing: the power to turn raw matter into nourishment. That is when flour steps into the spotlight, not as a supporting player, but as a foundation tool. With nothing more than flour, water, and a basic heat source, you can produce flatbreads, simple noodles, dough, crusts, coatings, creating something substantial enough to eat, enough to keep moving forward. No elaborate recipes required, no specialty ingredients needed. As long as you hold flour, you can always begin. 100 grams of flour delivers around 350 to 370 calories. But that figure is not the most vital detail. Its authentic power lies in its capacity to multiply. From a single simple powder, you can generate many servings, many meal variations, and stretch the food reserves you already possess. Without flour, you are limited to consuming only what remains. With flour, you can actively create what comes next. That distinction marks the gap between passivity and agency. Flour does not just help you survive a single day, it prevents you from becoming trapped when the landscape begins to shift. When your choices narrow sharply, the ability to conjure a new meal from sparse elements becomes your single greatest advantage. Regarding storage, flour can last 6 to 12 months under normal conditions and considerably longer if sealed away from moisture and heat. No elaborate gear required. Just humidity control. That alone is enough to sustain quality across seasons. The biggest error is only buying flour when you have a specific baking plan in mind. But when conditions destabilize, you do not need a fixed plan. You need open options. The solution is refreshingly simple. Always keep enough to exceed your usual habits. Not to hoard, but so you are never cornered by what is already available. Because at a certain point, the question is not what you currently have to eat. It is whether you can generate more. And when that moment crystallizes, you will finally understand. The simplest powder in the pantry is what unlocks the broadest range of possibilities. Number 3. Multivitamins. You do not notice your body weakening on the exact day it starts. There is no loud signal, no dramatic moment that triggers a warning. You still consume meals, still function, still proceed through your routine. But something is shifting in a direction you cannot steer. You no longer select food based on what your body truly requires. You select based on price tags, convenience, and whatever happens to remain. Less variety, fewer fresh elements, more monotony. And across time, your body adapts, but not in a constructive way. It does not plummet into severe deficiency instantly. It merely slides downward by slow degrees. You do not spot a specific nutritional gap. You just sense that you are no longer yourself. Not the same energy baseline, not the same mental speed, not the same physical stability. Small tasks stretch longer. Fatigue days stack higher. And you cannot isolate the reason. The issue is not the volume of food. It is the invisible micronutrients you cannot perceive, but your body depends on every single day. That is the moment multivitamins act as a buffer. Not to rocket you into superhuman strength overnight, but to prevent you from eroding further week by week. One small pill each day does not radically alter your present, but it shields your tomorrow from quietly slipping downward. This is not about an instant rush. It is about cumulative preservation. After several weeks, after a few months, the divergence begins to show if that tiny input is missing. And the danger lies in the fact that you often recognize the gap far too late. Multivitamins typically hold a shelf life of 1 to 2 years. Stored in a dry place shielded from light is entirely sufficient. No refrigeration, no dependence on complex systems, no space burden. Yet they fill a role that almost nothing else on this list can replicate. You do not need them while everything remains stable. You need them when things start to wobble. And that is precisely the pivot many miss. You cannot fully dictate what you consume during unstable periods, but you can influence whether your body slips below a functional baseline. You do not visibly see yourself getting weaker. You just assume you are more tired than usual. The solution is remarkably straightforward. Keep enough to cover a few months, not as a health enhancer, but as a stabilizing force when your diet can no longer deliver the same spectrum. Because eventually, the trouble is not whether you eat enough bulk. It is whether your body still operates the same way. And by the time you notice the difference, the slide has already been underway. Number 2, white rice. The foundation nobody thinks about until they are forced to lean on it entirely. You do not lack rice. You simply have never imagined relying on it as your complete backbone. There is a deeply reliable human pattern. When everything grows costlier, more tangled, harder to navigate, people do not chase novelty. They retreat to the simplest thing. And across nearly every culture, that thing is identical. Not because it is extraordinary, but because it is extraordinarily stable. Rice demands no complex storage rituals, no chilling, no elaborate preparation. You only need water and heat, and you can routinely create a meal that is substantial enough to sustain life. But the deeper value of rice is not found in the sensation of a full stomach. It is found in its ability to keep you from becoming dependent. When you have rice, you are not forced into constant difficult decisions. You do not have to endlessly weigh price against quality. You possess a reliable floor to stand upon, no matter how wildly other variables swing. One large bag of rice can spawn dozens, even hundreds of servings. And when calculated by cost per meal, it sits among the very lowest you can locate. Not because it is cheaply made, but because it is ruthlessly efficient. Yet here is what you fail to notice. You still buy rice, but you buy from habit, not from strategy. You buy just enough to use. You buy when you run low, and you inevitably buy at the current market price. The urgent hour is not when rice physically disappears from the shelf. It is when you begin to realize everything else is rocketing upward and rice becomes the singular option that is still manageable. White rice can be stored for 10 to 20 years if kept sealed and protected from moisture and pests. Even under ordinary household conditions, you can keep it for a remarkably long span without losing its core value. The solution is not to fill a room with it. It is to always have a sufficient cushion so you're never forced to buy when conditions are no longer favorable. Because at some crossroads, you will not be hunting for something fancier. You will be hunting for something steadier. And at that moment, you will understand that what you once dismissed as basic is precisely what helps you stand firm the longest. Number 1, water. The single element you can never replace. You can go without many things and still find a path forward. But there is one element that, if missing, halts everything instantly. It is not food. It is water. You do not grasp the towering value of water because you have always had it on demand. You twist a tap and it flows without thought. You do not plan. You do not prepare. But with just a small disturbance, a power grid failure, a system malfunction, a contamination event, you will witness how brutally fast the entire picture transforms. You cannot cook. You cannot preserve. You cannot maintain your body's basic thermostat. The worth of water is not locked in nutrition. It is locked in the fact that everything else on this list depends on it completely. You have rice, but without water you cannot cook a single grain. You have food, but without water you cannot keep it safe. You have everything, yet without water you can use nothing. An adult requires roughly 2 to 4 liters per day just to sustain baseline function. Not to thrive, simply to avoid a downward spiral. But here is what most people fail to do. They do not prepare in advance, not because water is costly, but precisely because it is too cheap to occupy their thoughts. And that is the single most dangerous blind spot. The urgent moment is not when your throat is dry. It is when you catch yourself silently asking, if tomorrow there is no water, what will I do? And if you do not have an immediate, concrete answer, you're already standing dangerously close to the edge. Water does not demand complexity to store, just a handful of clean containers. Tuck them in a cool place. Shield them from light. Or even simpler, always retain enough for a few days buffer. You do not need a warehouse supply. You just need to avoid starting from absolute zero. Because in the final calculation, every single item on this list only exists as a viable resource if water is present. And once you truly internalize that, you will finally understand why the most ordinary thing in existence is the one thing that can never be substituted. You do not need to prepare flawlessly. You just need to refuse to start from zero when the ground begins to shift. The items in this video are not exotic, not expensive, but they are the ones your mind will race toward first when they are no longer the same. People panic buy once the shelves have already transformed. Those who move early perform one simple, calm action. Each time they shop, they add just a little more. No extreme accumulation, No fear-driven behavior, simply preserving their power to choose. If right now you had to start with just one item from this list, which would you select? Leave a comment below. And if this video helped you see clearly what you used to glance past, make sure to subscribe to my channel so we can stay one step ahead together. In the next video, we examine 9 canned foods that are quietly vanishing from shelves, not because they are gone forever, but because those who prepare early are securing them very quickly.